congratulations to that person.
Except on there.
Yeah, that's the name.
Great, thank you.
Okay, so congratulations and thank you to that person for their feedback. Since today we're talking about mentoring, I want to point out a couple of important resources. You know, as you all know, we like to repeat topics in K-Club over the years, just ones that are relevant, and believe it or not, we've actually not tackled mentoring in a couple of years. And it's one of the most important topics to everyone in all stages of their career development, I think. And so I wanted to highlight this National Research Mentoring Network that the ACTSI asked us to highlight. And it is mentees, mentors at every career stage and in all different areas, whether it be non-faculty research mentors, mentees, beginning stage in research or mentors. And it's really just to develop this network that you can rely on. And the 4 things that they talk about on their website are to connect you with guided virtual mentorships, maximize your mentorships through the training. They also want to help you secure grant funding and facilitate your own programs using the facilitator training. So it looks like I've not personally checked it out any more than what I've done for this talk to introduce it to you, but I think it looks like a really rich resource, and so I encourage you to all go to the nrmnet.net website and check it out for yourselves. The other research mentoring that mentoring in general I wanted to highlight for you is the Department of Pediatrics. So this is Pediatrics specific, but we offer a mentoring checkup. And for those of you who have participated in, I think it's really valuable. It just connects you with 2 to 3 mentors that you've probably never met before, just to sort of give you an outside perspective and maybe give you some ideas of things you haven't thought about. And the people who've been through this program who find it very, very valuable, those in Department of Pediatrics who are interested in this, be on the lookout for a call for mentees. It'll come out later this month or in early April. So with that said, I'd like to turn it over to Luann Brown to introduce our speaker today.
Well, it gives me I'm greatly honored and privileged to introduce my friend and colleague, longstanding friend and colleague, David Guidot, who is the Jeffery R. Pine and Tenure Professor of the Department of Medicine. He's also the Director of the Division of Pulmonary, Allergy, Critical Care, and Sleep. Did I get all the things? Okay. And he's also a staff pulmonary physician at the VA. Dave has been a long-time director of the T32, first through NIAAA and now through NHLBI. So he's had a long history of mentoring, and he was recently awarded the Founders Medal at a recent meeting of the Southern Society of Clinical Investigation. He is a native of Detroit, and he went and got a bachelor's degree and MD at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and he's residency and chief resident at the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis. So this is a warm spring day for you, Dave?
I didn't wear a coat.
I see that. I was just going to make that comment. And then he did a pulmonary and critical care fellowship at the University of Colorado. Again, a nice spring day in Colorado. And he was an assistant professor there. Then he came to Emory as an assistant professor, and then that's where David and I met. First of all, I became his mentor, but that has thankfully evolved into friend and long-standing collaborator. I mean, you know, when you get a call about whether you're going to be a mentor, there's lots of questions, and you're thinking, oh, what's this person like, and does this person have drive, and does this person have a sense of humor, because to me that's essential. Do they get along well? Do they play well with others? All those kinds of things. And those were things Dave met in spades. And so realizing that it started as a mentor relationship, as I said, I'm grateful that it has matured and evolved into a friendship and collaboration. Because for me, the collaboration has allowed and opened doors that allow me to do the type of science I get jazzed about, which is clinically relevant research, so those doors have been opened wide, and they've been very fruitful, I think. So I'm going to turn it over to Dave. I'm not going to tell you the dirt because he knows equal amounts on me after 20-plus years of collaboration. So, Dave?
Thanks, Luann. Well, anyone who knows Luann knows that you could send a team of EI investigators and you can find any dirt on Luann. There's just no, it doesn't exist. Turnout, I'm a little nervous. So, someone asked you to give a lecture on mentoring. The first question is, are you a good mentor? Do you have any street cred? Talk about this. And if someone asked me if I'm a good father or a good husband, my answer would be, God, I hope so. Because it's an important relationship. So I have experience as a mentor, but whether it's going to inform this presentation or not, time will tell. Dan mentioned the Southern Society of Clinical Investigation meeting. Why we're a month late. Some of you may have seen that I was supposed to do this in February. Of course, he gets a call from me about a week or 10 days beforehand. You were walking across campus or something. I could hear all this wind blowing and everything. And Southern Society of Clinical Investigation had to move their meeting because of North Carolina bathroom bill. And what happened was North Carolina is having a lot of organizations pull out, so the NBA moved its All-Star game. So you can imagine New Orleans had a choice. You know, we can host the NBA All-Star game, or we can have this little society meeting. Now, they weren't kicking us out, but everyone warned us, don't go to New Orleans to the All-Star game, and there'll be bedlam, and it was already Mardi Gras. So I stayed and say, they've moved with the meeting, I'm really sorry, and she was very nice about it, so we rescheduled for March, so thank you for waiting. All right, so when you talk mentoring, the question is, how does somebody go from here? This is, I started my fellowship at the University of Colorado. Actually, I felt that young. So there were physicians in the room. It's still frightening to me that they let me do things. You know, I graduated from medical school 33 years ago this June, and so I still have to realize that I'm not just playing the part in a TV show. So I felt about this old when I finished my medical training at the University of Colorado. So the question is, how do you go from there? And I put in this picture because one of the Emory photographers took it for Emory Medicine or something a few years ago. I just thought it was a cool picture. You can't tell, but my hair was still somewhat dark behind there. Now, completely gray. So one thing I'm going to share with you is how you go from one place to another. I'm going to give you some examples of, one, the mentoring I received at Colorado, but also some of the mentoring I do now, and then try to leave you with some advice. And over lunch, it's going to be hard to do more than that. It's such a big topic. It's such an important relationship. I would not want to give anyone relationship advice per se, at least not something that would guide the rest of your life. But if I can give you a few tips that help or something to think about, and I'll leave time for questions or rebuttals if anyone has any. So, when I was a fellow, I had done medical school and residency and fellowship training, and I'd never done any research. In fact, when I was a second-year resident at the University of Minnesota, I got called to the chairman's office. If you're over at the county and you're post-call and you've been up for 30-something hours, getting a call to the chairman's office is not a call you want to get. If you ever call, but Lucky's such a nice guy, you never have to hear a call from Lucky. So, across town from St. Paul over to Minneapolis, and I meet there, and the chairman asked me if I want to be the chief resident at the university when I finish my residency. I said, well, I'd be very honored. And he said, because you're interested in academic medicine, right? Now, even I was smart enough to know that there's only one answer to that question. Yes. My plan was to finish my residency and go back to Detroit. Some people think that that's not a very lofty goal. No one ever sits around and says, hey, honey, let's go to Detroit this summer and take in a show. It's just not that kind of town. But it's where I grew up and it's what I knew. So my plan was to do my residency, finish, go back to Detroit and be a general internal medicine doctor in practice. Not a bad goal, but it didn't happen. And part of it, the reason it didn't happen is because that fateful event. The chair asked me, Do you want to be president? And saying, because you're interested in academic medicine, right? Because he was the kind of guy who thought there was no other pathway in medicine that anyone would want. So lied. It was a white lie. It was, but it got to be very pivotal for me because then, over the next year or two, people that wouldn't have gotten to know, chiefs of cardiology and other divisions, started talking to me, and I started thinking about doing a fellowship. So when I went looking for fellowships, I went to a place where research was required. And I finished my first year of clinical medicine in Colorado. I met John Replan. I actually met him as a first-year fellow. John was an MD who did no clinical medicine. He ran a highly successful laboratory. And my instincts were to pick someone that I thought I would get along with. And this is the first lesson of choosing mentors, choosing your second mentor, your third mentor, or someone else in your team. The key is to pick people you think you want to hang out with. That's very corny and very cliche, but I cannot tell you how important that is. So John was a rock star when I was a fellow at Colorado. This guy had a number of publications, ran this huge laboratory, extremely well funded. I remember a year or so after being in this lab, we'd go to a national meeting and there'd be a big room with like 12 people in it. And then John would get up to speak and 150 people would come in through the back door, sit down, he would speak, and they'd all leave. I mean, Paul McCartney was playing or something. But what impressed me about him was he was incredibly charismatic, very fun to hang around with. When I talked to him, because I'd met with maybe 15 potential mentors at Colorado, and they're wonderful scientists there and wonderful people, but all John talked about was how fun science was, and this is a great time in your career, and, by the way, if you need to go get your car fixed, or you got to get your kids to school, whatever, don't worry about it, there's no hours here, very relaxed and everything. And that impressed me. I'd come through many years of regimented clinical training where you expected to be someplace all the time. But John could not have been a better mentor to me. About halfway through that first year in the lab, my mother became quite ill and wound up dying about 6 months later of melanoma. And I was going back and forth from Denver to Detroit and had little kids, and it was an incredibly stressful time. And I really thought I'm going to wash out because getting nothing done in the lab, I wasn't any good in the lab, I was the least scientifically skilled person you ever met trying to do research. And John came up to me, he could sense the stress, and he said, just don't worry about it. 10 years from now, no one is going to see that this was not a productive year in your CV. It's just not going to matter. Just relax, take care of your family, whatever you need to do. And that was very helpful, and that reminded me why I had chosen him as a mentor, because he didn't say, well, when are you going to get this experiment done? When am I going to see your data? Where's your paper? Later, he would say, where's your paper? Very often. So once, things started clicking for me in the laboratory, he was extraordinary at teaching me how to give presentations, how to write. I don't know if John ever designed an experiment for me. He expected me to design experiments, but he was very good at the big picture and helping me communicate science and be excited by it. And then something very serendipitous happened. After the first year in the lab, for me in the lab, John recruited Joe McCord. Name may not mean anything, but I'll say that Joe McCord, as a graduate student at Duke University in the late 60s, discovered superoxide dismutase. And that opened up the entire field of free radical biology and medicine. Before then, it was thought that things like superoxide couldn't even exist in a biological system because it was reactive. So Joe was a brilliant biochemist, very, very smart scientist, but not the charismatic person John was, and it turned out to be a perfect complement between the two. So I learned an enormous amount of science from Joe, and I learned a lot about how to give a presentation, how to write a paper for John. The combination was very important. Now, part of it is you're sitting there saying, well, this is supposed to how to develop good mentoring relationship, but the lesson for me is, one, there was a little bit of fortune. Obviously, I happened to be in the right place at the right time, but also it was recognizing that neither one of these people had everything I needed. And they were jealous of each other. In fact, John recruited Joe. So early on, I realized that having both of them as mentors better for me than say, well, I joined John's lab, I got to stick with John. So when I put in my CADE application to NHLBI, I asked NHLBI if I could have co-mentors, which wasn't very common back then. Now it would be impossible to put in a CADE without 5 people in your mentoring team, because that's the whole philosophy. But at the time, having co-mentors required special permission from the Institute. So it was wonderful. The thing I realized after working with them for a few years is that mentors have their strengths, but they also have their blind spots, potentially. And so John Repine was a fabulous mentor. Everything that came out of the lab had to have his name on it. That's incredibly common in academic medicine. John was not the only person who had that philosophy, but I realized after a couple of years on the faculty, I was going to wither and die in the vine if I didn't leave. So that's their lesson is, an important person in life, we still communicate. I just talked to Joe within the past week. The relationship has to evolve, and staying dependent on your mentor is not a good thing. Collaborating with them, and I'll talk about Luann in a second because she's already mentioned that, collaborating with your mentors later is fine, but you have to establish your own identity. And so I'll never forget, I had the opportunity to come to Emory. It was not nearly the environment it is now, 25 years ago, especially in adult pulmonary. And I remember the people of Colorado saying, why would you leave? I mean, this is insane. You're leaving the mothership. And I said, well, I want to see if I can make it on my own. That was the key thing, is to recognize that after I'd been working with John and Joe for about 5 or 6 years at that point, I was by no means cocky about it. I didn't think I was going to set the world on fire, but it was very important to say to yourself, can I do this on my own? Can I establish different collaborations? Can I take what they've given me and build on that? But if I'd stayed at Colorado and we had built a nice house in the foothills and my wife said, what are you doing to us? Can't believe it. I don't want to move to Atlanta. Here now. But it was my sense that if I stayed in this laboratory, which was very good at getting people from 0 to 40 miles an hour, but didn't get them to the next level, so to speak, that my career would end there. And, you know, I promised the chairman at Minnesota that I would go into academic medicine. So when Luann has mentioned this a little bit, so this is really, I call it a green card marriage. I don't mean that to be in any way disrespectful. If the movie Green Card was Gerard Depardieu and Andy McDowell, what happened was I called first NIH. I called some like general number and so I needed to move my K, and they said, well, who has it now? And I said, well, what do you mean? You have it. I hadn't even called NHLBI. I didn't even know how to navigate those. So finally got somebody who took pity on me and said, okay, if you want to move your K, you need to get a mentor at Emory. So Joe McCord recommended Luann. And I don't know if she remembers the conversation, but I called her and I said, you don't have to do anything. I won't bother you. I know you're really busy. I just need someone to sign for me. You know, it's an administrative step. And she was very nice. Luann's always very nice. And so I think when I first got here, I was doing Dean Jones, and I sat in a room with slides. Who's here old enough to remember slides? So I actually had a carousel with slides. I presented some of my work, and so what was a marriage of convenience or a green card marriage to get through NHLBI, as was mentioned, we've been great colleagues and collaborators for 22 years. There was about a 10-year period in my career when I didn't have as many administrative responsibilities, and Luann and I talked every day on the phone. Half it was science, half it was what our kids were doing, because we happen to have daughters and sons who are the exact same age. And so it's really been a wonderful relationship. So there's an example, though, where I could collaborate with my mentor because she wasn't possessive. She didn't say, well, we can work together, but everything's got to come through me, or everything's got to have me as a senior author. So Luann's very good about being caring. She's not jealous. I hope. I haven't never seen that. She's very, very patient with me, who takes the scientist out of efficient scientists every time I open my mouth. Once in my life, someone asked me on a bus where I got my PhD, and she had never met me before, and I said, if you talk to me for 5 minutes, you won't ask that question. I mean that with all due respect. I still rely on bench scientists like Luann and Joe McCord earlier, because it really takes a team of people with different skill sets. All right, so that's my history. So final point of Luann is, Luann was being recruited away to UAB. Hate UAB. No, we like UAB. Great place, but they were being recruited away. I was a new assistant professor here, so I made an appointment with Devin Cornish, who was pediatrics at the time. And I said, you can't let her leave. We're building a better clubhouse. I actually said that. We have this great team. We're just building. We're just getting going. You can't let her leave. And he said, I have never had a meeting like this. Who let you in? He was right. So no. So we sat down and discussed what it would take to keep Luann here. So I was her agent. Because Luann is I don't think she would pound her fist and make a demand at gunpoint. So anyway, so Luann stayed, and that's been very important. So that's another part about mentoring, is the relationship evolves and matures. You can, as trainee, you can still take on a different role, and you can become more collaborator, colleague, agent, and those sorts of things. So it was my pleasure to keep you, Luann. I can't imagine if you had left what would happen to me. All right, so this is Fernando Olguin. So Fernando was the first person I ever mentored in the lab. So when I came here, the pulmonary division was very, very small. Fernando was the chief resident at the university hospital and wanted to do research. And so I had Kay, and they had a fellow come work in the lab, which would never happen now. But at the time, there weren't many mentors in the pulmonary division. So Fernando came and worked with me. And another lesson, Fernando had never done research before. He spent a year in my lab, or 2 years in the lab, naive about research. But the project was a great, it was just keying off. His first year was in the JCI. I mean, talk about being in the right place at the right time. But Fernando, for a variety of reasons, some of it was visa issues, he was from Mexico, some of it was personal. He couldn't stay, and he couldn't stay working in my lab. But the key thing was, he said, I'm not sure, I remember him asking me one day, I'm not sure I'm going to ever be able to ask the right questions, or ask a question. That's, if you know that, and you have that anxiety, is fantastic, because that's key. He spent a couple years in my lab. I taught him how to do experiments in my lab. I helped him write papers and give presentations. But the key thing was imparting him that whatever he did later, he needed to ask important questions. So Fernando and I stayed very close friends. I still have it when he refers to me as his mentor to people when we meet at a national meeting, but in reality, he worked with me for 2 years, 20 years ago. And now he's spectacularly successful, full professor at Colorado, head of an asthma institute. So he's doing asthma research at all what he did in the laboratory with me, which was animal models of acute lung injury. But there's no disconnect, because I'd like to believe that what I did for Fernando is what John Repine did for me, which is help him to formulate an idea, how to present it in a very crisp way, how to write a good paper. Once you have those skills, you can translate to any field. So another lesson at this point is to remember that you do not have to do what your mentor does scientifically. What you want from a great mentor is to teach you the skills to be a successful scientist and translate to almost any domain. In fact, research I'm doing in my lab and that Luann and I do has a little bit of similarity to what I did in the lab as a fellow, but in reality it's quite different. But I still take the lessons I got from John and Joe all the time. So Fernando's a great example where working with a mentor, not the best mentor, but I was available. And he's continued to build on that, and we have a wonderful relationship, even though his science now could not be more different than what he did with me. So so that's lesson one in terms of, I'm going to give you examples of my mentoring relationships, not to go, wow, I'm great, because that's clearly not the case. But just to give you an example of what I think has worked in certain relationships and why it's worked. So Ashish Mehta, a physician who was in our training program, he did internal medicine at Emory and then did the Pulmonary Critical Care Fellowship. He had worked in the laboratory of my predecessor, a guy named Jesse Roman, who's now the chair of medicine at Louisville. And Ashish had done basic science in medical school and had done some basic research with Jesse in the lab. But as a fellow, he had gone to become chairman of medicine, and Ashish approached me about working in the lab. Okay, this is great fit. He's got a lot of experience, which not many of our MD fellows have when they come into the lab. So he worked in the lab, and we were doing models of alcohol and lung injury. At the time, we were working out the details about how alcohol was inhibiting macrophage function within the airspace and making people susceptible to pneumonia. And we stumbled upon, that's a stumbled upon. I stumble and tumble, but we stumbled upon the fact that alcohol inhibited zinc transport into the airways, and it was the zinc deficiency which was a big part of this. So Ash and other people in the lab worked all this out. Really a big, exciting project. I'd been in the lab for a couple of years. He came to me and said, I really like research. I don't like being in the laboratory. I like the animal model. And so I want to figure something else out to do. So here's another key thing. You have the courage to say to your mentor, the people around you, I like science, but I don't like this project, or this is not the pathway I see myself being on. Don't get in a lane and just go. have courage to say, something else that fits me better. I'm not discarding what I've learned. Those experiences are part of what I've done. I mean, I'm even a science major in college. And I was a literature and humanities major in Michigan and spent time in women's studies and film studies and art history than I did in science. That is still very important to me. That education will never go away in the sense of what it led me to how I think about medicine, a lot of other things. In fact, I did it by design. I mean, I knew I was going to go to medical school if they'd let me in, but anyway, it's not about me. But the point is, any experience, it's a little bit about me. Those experiences still are important. So Ashish came to me and had the courage to say, this is not what I want to do. I don't want to give up everything, but I don't like the models. I don't like working on that. And so the mentor has to also be flexible. Has to be mature about it. Because here was a project that was just taking off in a really big way, and that was going to lose some momentum, at least in the laboratory. What I said to Ashish was, that's perfect. Because we're ready now to test this in clinical trials or human subjects work. So now Ashish decided, okay, I want to do more clinical trials, more translational research in humans. So we figured out a way for him to do the Masters of Science in Clinical Research. Many of you probably know about that. Anyone here in that program? Okay, so hold on. Okay, it's good. Up to. You didn't raise your hand. You were kind of intimidated, afraid I'd call you out. No. So Ashish did the MSCR, got a different set of skills than I could ever give him in the laboratory. And now he's a funded investigator at the VA doing a randomized controlled clinical trial, taking people with alcohol abuse out of alcohol treatment programs and giving them zinc or plus an antioxidant called S-adenosylmethionine or SAMe. And he has to see, can we take people who have very severe macrophage dysfunction with their alcohol abuse and accelerate the recovery? Because even if you stop drinking, and some people relapse and go in and out, it takes many months before their immune system in the lung repairs itself. So for me to be able to say to Ashish, your plan is perfect. A lot of trying to retool. It was 3 or 4 years before he even had what he needed to do the project, but you have to have the long game in mind. So good mentoring requires flexibility in that vision, but also the key was the trainee coming to me. Here I had fellows in the lab earlier who thought, I cannot tell Dave that I don't like this or I don't want to do this. And no matter how many times I tell trainees, you have to have the courage to come talk to me, because I only want you to be happy. I don't want you to do what I do. In fact, I haven't got a single fellow I've ever trained who has the exact same path that I have. So Ashish is doing spectacularly well, but it's not what he set out to do at the beginning. But what he's doing is still very much building on what he did in the laboratory. It's a little blurry. Good-looking guy named Jeff Otis. So Jeff was a kinesiology major in college, got a PhD in muscle biology, and was working in a very, very basic science lab, where all models were cell culture monocytes. And he was getting a lot done as a postdoc, but he had a sense that he wanted to do something more translational. So he contacted me and asked if he could do a second postdoc in my laboratory. And I said, well, I'll be honest, I don't know anything about muscle biology. I mean, I don't know anything about it. But we have some interesting animal models, and I said, to be honest, myopathy is the #1 cause of disability in people who drink too much, and we study a lot about alcohol. And we were developing a research project in HIV at the time, and I said, HIV-related myopathies, and again, a great source of disability. If you want to come and work with us, I'll learn as much as I can about muscle cells, but I can tell you it's brain only holds so much information. So, but we have the animal models, and I can help teach you, how to do more animal physiologically relevant research, which wasn't to impugn where he was. It's just that lab wasn't set up to do that. So I came, and again, the key is to be very flexible. Had several PhD trainings in the laboratory. As I've already established, I didn't get a PhD. They couldn't get in graduate school if I tried. I'm sure they would kick me out. But Jeff, great to have in the lab, because he told me and our people in the lab a lot about the things he's interested in, and he adapted our models to study things that were relevant in terms of muscle dysfunction. KO1 from NIH, which was very exciting. I never had anyone get a KO1 before. I didn't even know what the mechanism was. It turns out it's a great mechanism for PhD basic scientists. And then, but I told Jeff right away, I said, the key is I want you to leave Emory because you have to get away from me, which is Colorado. As much as I like John and still fabulous mentor, I said, I want you to have opportunities and options different than what I had. I had to leave Dodge or not anywhere. So right in the beginning, I said, you know, I will co-author a couple of papers to establish a relationship, and we needed that for him to get his K. I said, after that, you know, get your papers, I'll make suggestions, I'll do whatever you need me to do. This is your work, you own it, the world needs to know it's yours. So that's another important point. And again, if I'm showing these examples, it's not to say I'm fabulous, it's that I learned from my own experiences. And if you have a mentor that won't give that freedom and that independence, where it allows you to go move that pathway, then that's a relationship you have to really rethink. And you have to decide, do I leave this relationship bitter and upset and I didn't get successful because of this or that? That's a bad way to leave the relationship. Or say, thank you for your time. I've learned I have this other opportunity. So from the beginning of his K, I told Jeff, we need to target your own independent pathway and figure out what you're going to do. And so by the end of his 5th year in the K, he had secured a tenure track position at Georgia State. Very committed to staying in Atlanta because of his wife's job and other things. I told him, particularly, I said, you're a PhD who's a muscle biologist, clinical pulmonary division. You guys span with us, not because you're not a fabulous scientist, but just it's not going to be the best fit for you. So I'm great at Georgia State. Just an email from him a couple weeks ago. He's going up for his promotion and tenure. So that was another good example where the skill a mentor can give you, if I gave Jeff any, not how to do the science in his field, but how to help him think about what models would be clinically relevant, what will really be sellable, if you will, or appealing to NIH and other agencies. And then the one I remember from Jeff is we'd my office editing things, and I'd say, well, no, you've used the gerund form, they can't use that, and these, you know, I grew all the grammar with him. He said, oh my God, how do you know all this? And I said, 12 years at Catholic school. There's a reason they called it grammar school when I was a kid, because that's all we did. Here's Viranush Subhanbong. Viranush is a really talented young woman who went to medical school in Thailand, then did residency in Chicago and was doing her fellowship in Vermont, and decided she really liked science. She got recruited to Emory by my predecessor, who then left 4 months later. Now, Jesse's a great guy. There were a variety of reasons. He didn't recruit her with this plan in mind, but the timing could not have been worse. So Viranush is very interested in lung fibrosis. That's what Jesse did. And so it's like the story with Jeff Otis. She, I said to her, we find you a mentor, and it turns out I was probably the one person at that in the transition of our division that could help. I said, tell you what, I don't know anything about fibroblasts, but if you work together, again, just like with Jeff, we have some models that may help you. Viranush has done spectacularly well. She has her KO8 from NIH, put her in her first R01 recently. And again, it's another example where you don't have to have the same scientific fit. I mean, you have to have some thing with your mentor. The key thing is to find a relationship that works. And Veer and I get along very well. We enjoy working together in the laboratory. How many examples are helpful or not? I'm sorry. I guess no one's going to say, oh my God, this is not what we came for. Stacy?
Yeah, can I just ask
yeah, please, anytime.
So, and I'm sure you'll blush when I say this, but you're very altruistic. Like, how do people find sort of that level of altruism in a mentor? Because, like you said, you can kind of try to identify it early on, but there is some level of altruism that comes into play.
Yeah, I'm also very selfish.
But, okay, so talk to us about that. What do these mentors?
Well, no, I think I'm very selfish for these relationships. So I really love these interactions. I never saw myself as running a laboratory where we just cranked it out over and over again. So I had to train people in my lab, the technicians and other people, to be accommodating to that. Here's the fellow, here's the new resident, here's the students with us for a couple of months. It just with me. I'm not saying everybody has that personality, but to me, that's when science is really fun. And when I say I'm selfish, it's because it didn't take me too long to realize that's where the real productivity was. The real activity for me was making these collaborations and interactions. So I'd like to thank you for thinking that I have any good in me. And I'm not Machiavellian either, but I think these relationships are really, to me, what's been sustaining scientifically.
So that's what comes to you. So
Yeah.
you really need to find out what makes that mentor tick in terms of what they get out of, like, what's in it for me. Kind of
Right, and I have a few things coming up where I'll sort of try to codify some of these things, but I think what I'm trying to impart, the key is build a good mentoring relationship starts with the person, their individual personalities. There's a lot of people in science who are brilliant scientifically but don't have great people skills. I mean, we just know that. I'm not demonizing them, it's just the way it is. Some people aren't meant to be mentors. They may have very productive laboratories, they may do a lot, they may be really wonderful people on some level, I guess. But I'm sure. Everything I say is like, let me see if I can get my other foot in my mouth. Okay, I got one in there now. Let's see what else I can say that'll just make people think, what a jerk.
Don't worry, this is being recorded.
What a jerk. But I have a couple minutes later, but I might as well just tell now. To work with a mentor that you want to spend time with, as this says at the beginning. So some brilliant people scientifically and I've seen these relationships where a friend of mine, when I was a fellow or somebody, they'll go work with somebody who's notoriously difficult, lab meetings at 6 p.m. on a Friday, for 2 hours, I mean, that's just not family-friendly or individual-friendly. And they may have, 200 publications and be candidates for the National Academy of Science, but I don't want to go work in that lab. So I've told my friends and other people, if you're not having fun, you're not going to stay with it. You say, well, I'm very interested in macrophage biology and whatever, and I said, you're not going to be interested in macrophage biology 6 months from now. I guarantee you. Know that this person has this reputation, they're not easy to get along with, but by the same time, there might be somebody else who fits with that, and they know it's a good fit for them. Fine. So I think maybe the people that I've attracted to work with me maybe have a shared value set around that. Years ago, when I was one of the few people doing research in our division, at one of the faculty meetings, some of the senior faculty were very upset because the 1 or 2 fellows we had doing research weren't covering the hospitals on the weekends. And one turned to me and said, well, what's Andres doing when he's, is he working in your lab? And I said, no, I hope he's up in the mountains with his wife and his kid hiking. How many more pounds of flesh do you want out of these people? And so, I mean, it doesn't just work with scientific mentors, it works with clinical people who just think of their own time. And so you have to find an environment and mentors who care about your output more than their own. And they will thrive. I'm 9 publications on my CV if it wasn't for all these people that work for me. As I said, I'm altruistic, but not really. I'm selfish, but in a benign, despot kind of way. Yeah. All right, so I better speed up so there's time for questions. And so the room isn't empty yet. So is that because you're told you can't leave? Because you're still somewhat. I always tell my wife, she'll say, it was a captive audience. I said, yeah, what does captive mean? They weren't captivated, they were just captive. All right, so Sushma Cribbs, another example. Sushma had multiple mentors as a resident fellow, including the aforementioned Fernando Olguin, who had come back to our faculty, was working in asthma, then got recruited away. So she had multiple mentors she was working with, and then they would leave after a year. So really bright, very energetic woman, and she would do a project and would just be getting started, and the mentors would leave. So she had 3 mentors leave the institution. And she's delightful. This is not people leaving her, it's just other opportunities, and that can happen. I was becoming division director in 2009. Sushma sat down with me because she was having kind of a crisis. She was finishing the fellowship, she was now joining the faculty. All of her mentors had left, and she didn't know what she was going to do. So I built on my experiences with Ashish Mehta earlier, and I said, well, Sushma, we have these really compelling data from an animal model of HIV, and I'd love to translate it into human subjects if you'd like to do that. So much like what Ashish did, set up a plan for her to get her MSTR as a faculty member. It's much harder to do it as a faculty member than a fellow, but we've done it with a few people. And now Sushma is very engaged in our HIV clinical trials we've had funding from. NHLBI. She just went up for promotion to associate professor. She's just submitted her first merit review at the VA. Because at one point I moved her from Grady to the VA to protect her time more when all this was going on. So that's another example of a trainee recognizing they had the passion for science. They didn't let a leaving or a setback hold them back. Many people would have given up before then at this point, but Sushma hung in there because she really wanted this to be successful. So to be honest, the only mentoring I do for Sushma is I get out of her way. I mean, can only hold her back. So I just say, Sushma, you've got all the firepower in the world. I'll help channel it. I'll help support your time. She's very driven, and she's done spectacularly well. So example where don't give up because your first project doesn't go, because you hit, lightning in a bottle in the first thing. If you love science and continue, you can do that. But you have to be pretty tough because there's no guarantees that it'll work out the first, second, or third time. Not all academic mentoring involves traditional investigator pathway. This is a young woman named Lindy Wolfenden. I was a mid-career person. I'm no longer mid-career unless I work till I'm 90. But at the time, I was building my lab. I was training fellows in the lab. But Lindy was a faculty member in our division. And she asked to have lunch with me, and she said, I'm really drifting. I don't know what I'm going to do academically. I don't have a pathway in mind. I really mentor people in my laboratory, but I can, if you're fine, I can try to help. So we started meeting regularly. I figured out that talking to her that she had an interest in cystic fibrosis. Clinically, this was at a time when we really didn't have anybody doing adult CF. Lucky members, for those pediatricians been around for a long time, there are very few adults with CF in the 70s and 80s and into the early 90s. Now, there are any adults with CF as children under 18. So helped Lindy figure out what she wanted to do, how to write a paper. We started getting together, and we had 3 or 4 years of just really a wonderful relationship, getting together with her periodically. Sadly, as I was becoming division director, she was diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer and died. And I don't say that to make that, but it's an incredibly important relationship for me because it made me realize that some of the mentoring skills that I had seen in other people and had been trying to acquire for myself did translate. So if you're not a physician scientist, you're not on that pathway, that doesn't mean you don't need mentors professionally. And not so much recently, but for a number of years, even when I was training other people, I had several key senior faculty and said, will you mentor me? And what do you need? I said, well, I just need to have lunch with you once a month and tell you what's going on, and sometimes just tell you stressing me out or what I'm thinking about doing and getting advice. So for many years, even up until I was in my late 80s, around 50, I'm 56, in case you're worried, I'm still vertical, but for a number of years, I would have senior faculty where I'd meet with them because I said, I still need life advice. So that's a key lesson about mentoring. You don't just take your 2 years and run. You may have 4 or 5 or 6 different mentors at different phases of your career, but always realize that it's important to establish those relationships, find people you want to spend time with, people whose advice value. So this is a paper from about 10 years ago now, and it's academic mentoring, how to give it, how to get it. And one thing I think is very important here, it says, because the primary purpose of attending medical school is to learn how to provide direct patient care, it is inappropriate to cause mentees to feel this activity is less worthy than the others. So John Pine, my mentor, gave up medicine right after his fellowship. He actually told me, you should just not practice. You should just go into the lab all the time. He didn't dismissively of clinical medicine, but it was very clear that he thought, well, if you really want to be successful, don't waste your time with clinical medicine. And he actually said to me one time, paper in the JCI is worth 1,000 trips to the clinic. Which I thought was kind of clever, but then I thought, that's just not me. So it's been very clear to me throughout my training that I never, ever, ever want a medical student, a resident, or a fellow, or anyone work with me to think that medicine is second. So I was a faculty, and I live this for myself, it's physician first. So if you're a physician, whether you want to be a clinical investigator, physician scientist, whatever we're calling that phenotype, or somewhere in between, if you want to give up clinical medicine, give up clinical medicine. If you want science to be what you want to do 100% of the time, and you would say, well, I'm glad I went to medical school, but that's not what I want to do, that's fine. But don't, if you go to talk to someone about working with them, and it's, you get the concern that they are dismissive of or not going to support, especially if you're an MD, whether you're an MD, PhD or not, going to work with someone who doesn't do any clinical medicine. You have to be very careful. They may be the best mentor in the world for you. Joe McCord was an unbelievable mentor for me. Joe never said you should give up clinic. He was very respectful of that. But be very careful when mentoring or you're talking to potential mentors that being a physician is of value. It informs your science. It's a part of who you are. And there are ways to be people. See, the idea you can't be successful in research if you're a physician, I think, is a bad message that was given to a lot of people over the years. The kind of translational work we do together with Luann and all the people I've talked about wouldn't be possible if we didn't understand clinical medicine. And another paper that came out just 7 years ago, why do people choose academic medicine? And they surveyed a lot of people, looked at all the data, and essentially the question remains unanswered. I think it's because why do little boys want to be firemen? It's cool, you get to ride the truck, I don't know. So academic medicine, you feel it, you want to do it. I wish I could distill it more than that, but I think those people have been bitten by the bug. Now they want to do it. But to figure it out, I mean, everyone's got their own story and their own reasons. So very few people are choosing clinical investigation. I'm just going to finish up here in the next couple minutes. There's a lot of problems with debt. I have a kid in medical school. He's getting married to a classmate in medical school. Kids have debt. But I think one issue, and I was in a forum at the aforementioned SSCI a few years ago, I think there's too much complaining. So one of my bits of advice, if you're looking for a mentor or you're thinking about working with people, is everyone can kvetch a little bit, if that's the right pronunciation of the Yiddish term. Everyone can kvetch a little bit about, funding is bad and this and that, but medicine's been a challenge, research has always been hard. When I finished my fellowship in 1992 at NHLBI, I was funding at the 8th percentile. Now I'm at the 8th percentile. It's, it goes like this. So we have to be careful as mentors, but particularly when you talk to people that you want to work with, it's okay if saying, well, it's a challenging time or whatever, but it's always been a challenging time. If you work with someone who's constantly complaining about they're in the wrong era, he's not going to be successful. So my colleagues all the time, we have got to stop complaining, especially in front of the children. Well, it's not true. We're a bunch of babies. And it's hard, but it's always been hard. And young people thinking about careers in medicine and science don't need to hear that. If you're applying for your K or something, I'm just going to give you a couple of tips. And I don't know if these slides are available for later, but it doesn't matter.
They are.
So early, it's amazing to me how many times people will contact me and say, yeah, there's this grant that's due next Friday. I want to look at it for me. So your mentor may be this mentor, but you have to be incredibly proactive about figuring out what may be available to you. Is it a K award? Is it a career development of other kind from American Heart, American Lung? Is there institutional funding you've heard about? Do not wait for your mentor to come and make a mechanism available to you. You need to be very, very proactive. But then bring that to this person. Is this a good idea? What do you think? Here's how much money is involved. I met one of our junior faculty last week. I don't somebody wanted to apply for a grant that expected him to dedicate 80% of his time to research, and they were going to give him a very tiny amount of money. I said, it's not going to work. We just, I appreciate your enthusiasm, but we have to look for a mechanism that will work for you. So strategy, but also don't wait for your mentor to say, okay, it's time for your K, it's time for this, it's time for that. You need to be very proactive. Find out everything you can about the mechanism. Again, your mentor may be very experienced. They may have put in this mechanism several times, but they may not have, or they may not have done it recently, or the rules may have changed. So you have to be very, very proactive about figuring it out. And then here's another lesson I tell people. Program officers, NIH, are like realtors. They want foot traffic. When I say realtors, I meant that in the best possible way. There's any realtors here. That wasn't meant to be pejorative in any way. They want foot traffic. They want business. The more the more name in their portfolio, the better for them. So don't be intimidated, especially if you're applying for a K award. Figure out, well, my science is maybe good for heart, lung, and blood, maybe National Cancer Institute, I'm not sure. Contact the program officers. Tell them who you are, what you're working on. You're in, get their advice, find out what they're looking for. Now, they're going sell. I mean, they're going to say, yeah, we're looking for applications, but they can help you figure out, is it a good fit? Some mechanisms are very specifically tailored to something. You don't want to waste 4 months applying for and finding out that your work doesn't fit with what they're interested in. So don't be afraid to contact program officers. You have to work at this relationship. So if you are a trainee and a mentor, no matter how charismatic or enthusiastic they are, they likely have a lot of things on their calendar that you don't know about. And I really miss being an assistant professor at the VA with nothing but myself to worry about and calling Luann every day. You may not miss that, but I certainly do. And I'm complaining, but there's a lot more on my plate now, so I tell people that work in my lab, schedule time with me, or walk in and say, can we chat? But you have to be very proactive. You've got to meet with your mentor regularly. Come to the meetings prepared. There's nothing worse than sitting down and looking at the mentor and asking them what they want to talk about. If they've called the meeting, you should be prepared. Come in to talk about data, whatever. Meet their deadlines. If they say, I really want to see this draft this manuscript by May 1st, you bring it April 15th. Mentor. Provide updates. I got a letter of recommendation. A grant is due this time. We need to, whatever. Keep them on task. They will appreciate it, believe me. Okay? So I'm going to finish with a few things I've learned along the way. This is at that point in my life where I can be the old man who sits on his porch and gives kids advice. Okay? All right. So I mentioned this earlier. If you have a choice between a great mentor and a great project with a difficult mentor, great mentor every time. Some people, it didn't matter to me what John Repine worked on. He's an asthma person, an interstitial lung disease person. It didn't matter. I went to work with John. So I didn't have any more interest in what he was working on scientifically than anything else. But a great interest in work with him because he's very charismatic. As I mentioned earlier, I also knew what changed the relationship. I was going in, but I figured it out. Choose a mentor who cares about your success. I can't say this enough. Sometimes the first mentor has never had someone before, and you just have to go on instinct. So there's someone you met working in the ICU or on the wards in the clinic, and you just like the way they think or how they treat you. But you have to go to work with someone who will treat you well. They have to care more about you than them. That's hard to find sometimes, but they're there. There's a lot more people who are altruistic and care about what their trainees do. We wouldn't be successful as a field or a career if we didn't have a lot of people like that. The other thing is sort of an offshoot. This is my father told me. My father's a physician. He's a really smart guy. He never once said it was better such a time. But he did. It was the only good thing about the good old days that I was younger. And very true. So that's why I tell the faculty, stop talking about what it was like when you were a resident. Stop talking about what it was like 20 years ago. If you want to share it with your friends that are your age, or you want to share a story with a trainee in a positive way, but otherwise, it doesn't help. I walked uphill 5 miles both directions of school when I was young. The snow in July. It's not true. This complaining issue. Be careful about people who just complain. Yes, it's raining. Yes, it's a tough time. Yes, and it's funding is hard to get. Yeah. I understand that. I'm not naive, but get over it. The people who are successful are the ones walking around with an umbrella. All right. The thing I tell people is my kid never read my CV. This is very important to me. First of all, it's not long. It recently went over to a backside of one page. So that was one of them. And it's much better to be famous at home. Academic medicine is wonderful. I put a lot of time into it. But don't give up other aspects of life, including family life. And then are more satisfying to bask in reflected glory. This is back to finding a mentor who cares more about your success. Good mentors have their own careers. They're successful. But their best moment should be when you are successful. And that's hard to know up front. But again, you can change different mentors at different phases in your life. And you're going to become a mentor. I would encourage you that you're far more successful if your trainees are successful. You really will. You'll be happier, more satisfied with what you've done. So I'm much more excited when Sushma Cribbs or Ashish get something than when although I still want to get my own funding, believe me. I spent a lot of time writing grant proposals. And then tell people sometimes in academic medicine the politics are so ugly because the stakes are so small. So that sounds very cynical. It's just from my perspective, having come up through part of the ranks, academic medicine is a wonderful, wonderful career, but just don't take it too seriously, and leaders who take themselves too seriously, just be aware. I mean, I can't say much more than that. Just a lot of people will fire a pipette, or who owns this incubator, who's got an office, he's got a better office than I have. It's just worth it, The ever was when I had this little hole-in-the-wall office at the VA, was the lowest paid faculty member in the whole division, and had them to do my science and less of anyone else's salary or office, because that just doesn't get you anywhere. If your job advertised in a journal online, would you apply for it? And so I tell my junior faculty all the time, life is too short. If you don't like your job, don't take it personally. Let's just figure out what you want to do. So you can switch. So this is one of my quotes by Isaac Newton. Seen a little farther is by standing on the shoulders of giants. So my advice to you is to go find a giant, because they are everywhere. And they're altruistic, and they care about you. So I'll stop there. And I didn't leave much time as I thought, but if there are any questions, I'm happy to stick around. No applause. No idea. That was deserved. Thank you. Are there any questions, comments, rebuttals?
Well, can I
Please.
Can I make a comment? I hope that you were able to sense of what an incredible mentor and leader David is. And I speak on our collective behalf. We've learned a lot from David, but also completely concur with every word that he has said. It's so incredibly important to choose somebody like David who can actually help you succeed. But I know that when David invests time in something, just on Friday, we walked up a meeting with David, and my mentor said I had forgotten what it's like to be in a room with David Guidot.
He didn't mean that as a compliment, by the way.
Because they had read that grant application in one word 3 times, front to back to front, and he knew every new detail that probably Stacy and Clint didn't remember. So anyways, thank you very much.
Sure. Anyone have any questions? Yeah.
I'm curious, what would you say is the most common way you've been approached by mentees going back on like a cold call, or hey, I know you through this other work, or this other person has kind of told me to come and chat with you?
Sure. It's about 50-50. So about half the people I've mentored have come through our Pulmonary and Critical Care Fellowship, where there's an established pathway, there's an expectation that some of them will do research. What then is, if I like them and they're smart, I aimlessly recruit them. So my predecessor, Jesse Roman, and other people in the division would say, well, that's not fair. You're supposed to wait for them to come to you. I said, why would you wait? Yeah, I spent time with them in the ICU, or she's fantastic. I told her I'd love to have her work in my lab. So all the trainees roughly have had it. The others are cold calls. Like, there's a guy sitting here, I won't come up. So Josh Levy is an ENT faculty member. I don't know how you got my name. You don't have to tell the whole group, but
you gave a talk on mentoring to the MSCR group. I saw it on the schedule, and I looked you up that way.
Josh contacted me, and he had an idea for a KL2, which is one of these institutional career grants. And so just out of the blue, he contacted me, and I've had quite a few of those. Jeff Otis, I showed earlier, had just emailed me and said, actually, someone else from his lab that had worked with him was in my lab by that point. And so about half of our cold calls, emails, phone calls, a resident comes by. Sometimes they're unbelievably unexpected pleasures in hindsight. Like Josh and I are having a blast. You may not. You haven't fired me yet. It's early.
Yeah.
I'm so excited that he contacted me. I mean, I'm learning a lot about his project, and so it's about half and half. I can imagine anybody being other than flattered to be cold called or cold emailed. They may not have time, they may be retiring, they may be leaving, they may not work, but you shouldn't take that as a rejection, like they jump for prom. But I would say if you've heard about someone, you've heard things, just contact them. Of the trainees I have, I've never had any contact with them until they called and said, would you help me out? Yeah.
In your experience, so you're working with a trainee, how long does it take you to get a feel for their strengths and weaknesses and help steer them? I've worked more with students, and probably one of my great successes was someone who was really came in as a master's student early on. Loved it, but that was not. After working for a little while, I knew that was not their strength.
Right.
And especially at the bench, and now they're actually a very successful federal judge in Virginia. Way better. And I will never get a speeding ticket ever in that state. But it took a while to sort of, and we was a very charismatic person, but that was sort of extreme where someone said, you're going to be wildly successful, but this is my year that you're going to be wildly successful in.
Yeah.
How do you?
Great question. So when I was a kid, I wanted to play in the NBA. I mean, I had all the desire in the world. I practiced. My parents would go nuts because I'd be out shooting in that way, aiming that lamp up at the basket so I could see at 10 o'clock at night to the NBA. So all the desire in the world doesn't get you there. So there are had many people in the lab or in audience where they wanted it, but they didn't have the skill set. It took me a little while, sometimes about a year or two, to figure that out. Or their desire was they wanted it, but really not bad enough. They didn't put in the time. The person was always coming in late or whatever. So, but I've had a few people where I've sat them down after a year or two and said, you know what, this doesn't fit for you, in my opinion. I know that's hard to hear, but I don't think this is your best fit. We're really good at these other things. And it's a hard conversation to have, and I've had it 3 or 4 times. But I don't identify it right away because some people bloom late or fish out of water in their research, and it takes them a while, a year or two, completely lab for the first 2 years for a variety of reasons, but most of it was so strange to me. And if someone had given up on me after a year, I would be in private practice and never have had that. So I think it takes a year or two with a fellow or now with a student you only have a short relationship with. I don't know what to say about that. But desire is not enough, and I think people find what's best for them. It may not be leave and become a judge, but it may be a different pathway. It may be, you're a fantastic teacher, I know you like science, or, you're going to be a great team member, but I don't see you ever running, having your own R01 funding, and, and I'll tell them it's exhausting, and it's stressful, and you don't seem to love it enough or put in enough time to get there. But if you still like science, you still like being a physician who's collaborating, let's find how to make that work. How a team member without being the quarterback, not to fall in a hackneyed cliche. I don't It's very hard. All right, full after there. So I want to just finish with one thing. When I was in medical school, one of my classmates would bet on me to get up here giving this lecture. I'm not a good enough student, but there was nothing distinguishing. I never won the science fair. I wasn't a science major in college. So what I've accomplished in academic medicine is because of people like Dan, it's because of other people, it's relationship building. It's not because of intellect, scientific knowledge. Clearly, I don't have all that. But if you're enthusiastic and you work hard and you want to have fun and build a better clubhouse, so people shouldn't be intimidated and think, oh, well, he can give this talk because he's, believe me, I was the least impressive medical student in the history of the University of Michigan. They don't even acknowledge I went there. Actually, I sent for my transcripts recently. They sent them. All right. Have a great day. Thanks for having me here.